hey, remember COVID and how that was a thing? It's still a thing. It's going to probably always be a thing. It's just going to be a thing that we have to deal with now. Like it's going to be like flu season. Oh, it's COVID season. Oh, you can't taste anything. Oh, your entire office has to work from home now for like 3 weeks. Cool. Oh, restaurants are closing down all over the place because the wait staff got COVID. Awesome. Can't travel for Thanksgiving because it's bad this year. Awesome. Yeah, whatever. But COVID was pretty weird. At least the 2020 part of COVID. We all went on lockdown, and then the lockdown was lifted and things got like way worse. And I get it. Like, there are two good arguments to both sides. All right. One side is like, meh, hospitals, you get overwhelmed. And then on the other side, you've got people who are just like, I don't give a crap. It's just a pretty bad cold. Mainly just kills grandma. Who cares? And like, you can't really argue either side. Both sides make good points. But I think the weirdest part of COVID was all the weird things that it did to people. You lose your sense of taste and smell. Some people got weird things with their toes. Some people's teeth fell out. All kinds of stuff. And I bring all of that up to say that as weird as COVID is, it's not as weird as some of the stranger epidemics that have swept through regions of the world. And we're going to talk about them this week on Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson. And again, this week, talking about some strange epidemics that have happened throughout the world. We're going to talk about the Italian syphilis outbreak, the dancing plague, and the Tanganyika laughter epidemic. Going to be a little bit shorter of an episode today, I think. Just 3 really quick stories, quick kind of footnotes in history that don't really get talked about. So let's jump in. We start our stories today in the Renaissance period of Italy. Such a glorious time in human history. There was just a lot of amazing artwork, a lot of incredible architecture, just like great literature being made. It was a time of artistic and creative growth and discovery. And I mean, look, you can find works by legendary artists like El Greco, Jean Fouquet, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle people who did all the paintings. And look, like, while we like to imagine that this world was just peaceful and occupied with its newfound love of art, the French, those dirty, dirty French, were just busy being syphilitic zombies that roamed the streets of Italy. So basically, it took a turn, didn't it? So in 1494, King Charles VIII of France invaded Italy with over 30,000 mercenaries that he had hired from all over Europe. Maybe because a lot of the rest of Europe really hated art, and they decided Italy needed to go. By February of 1495, the French had fought and defeated the Spanish in Naples, Italy. But after holding the city for a few months, Charles disbanded his army and returned to France and let them all go back to their respective homes. But it wasn't because he was tired of winning and just dominating the Italians, but it's because his entire army had been infected with, at least at that time, was a mysterious disease. Although it was known at the time as the French disease, it almost certainly came from dirty Italian prostitutes, also just known simply as Italians. And it was absolutely 100% syphilis. This French army, with mercenaries from all over Europe, had come into Italy, and while they were busy like defeating and conquering the Italians, they were also busy conquering the Italians, if you know what I mean. Just going through, rounding up all the women and just getting their dirty Italian diseases. Like, I took a shot at the French for being dirty, but if we're being honest here, the Italians were just as dirty. All right, maybe even more so. But like, unlike Al Capone's version of syphilis, which, if you know that story, just kind of reduced him to a mentally deficient man-child, this version of syphilis acted similarly to leprosy, in which the sores that appeared on people's hands, feet, and face and genitals slowly spread and rotted the skin and the flesh until the infected person eventually died. Horrifying, all right? Like, just, you get done, having some fun with a prostitute, and then you wake up the next morning and your wiener has just fallen off, or it's like rotting. That's so gross. At the height of this outbreak, it was not at all uncommon to see several people walking down city streets all over Europe, mostly in Italy, but all over Europe, looking like just an extra from like The Walking Dead. And look, if we're being honest, I think that's something that should totally be a part of Renaissance fairs. All right. Those people go hardcore with the characters that they build. We should have at least one or two like syphilitic zombies walking around the Renaissance fair if we're going to make it historically accurate. All right. But yeah, I mean, eventually, obviously, people got cured of the syphilis, if for no other reason than they all died. But yeah, let's move on. A few years later, to 1518 in Strasbourg, France, when a woman named Frau Trophea began just dancing in the street. And look, on its own, that's probably just a regular thing, since all French towns were probably prone to some sort of Sound of Music song and dance number at any given time back then. I mean, assuming we can believe all of those movies. I mean, right? They're historically accurate. But after about 4 minutes, Frau kept dancing, and she did not stop. All right. The next day came and went. Frau still twerking in the street. All right. Oh, after a week, 34 other people had joined Frau dancing in the street, who at this point probably had to have like calves of steel, like those river dance performers. Remember the tap dancing river dance? I was enamored with that when I was a kid. I thought river dance was super cool, which should tell you how dorky of a kid I used to be. I'm still a dork, if we're being honest. After a month, over 400 people were uncontrollably, constantly dancing in the streets of Strasbourg. And look, this wasn't like a really creative protest or like some weird David Bowie, Rolling Stones collaboration. Hey, that's a Dancing in the Street reference. These people were dancing nonstop. And by nonstop, I mean they literally lacked the physical ability to stop dancing in the street. And then people started dancing themselves to death. They started having heart attacks, strokes, or they were literally just so exhausted because they weren't able to eat and drink and like keep up. And they just collapsed. And eventually the Strasbourg City Council reached out to local physicians for help to try to make it stop. So, doctors showed up and they immediately ruled out any sort of astronomical cause because, like, look, space is pretty cool, but it wasn't that cool. Like, it didn't have the ability to control people's actions. They also ruled out any sort of supernatural and divine causes because, I mean, look, if 9 years in an ultra fundamentalist Christian school has taught me anything, it's that God hates dancing more than like gay people and alcohol. All right. So he's like, God's not going to send some sort of divine plague where people can't stop dancing. All right. If anything, God was appalled by this already. Because guys, dancing is the devil. Don't put baby in the corner. I think that's a line from Dirty Dancing. I don't know. But like, that's what God is. God is the father from Dirty Dancing. Instead, the local doctors claimed that the dancing was just a natural disease caused by hot blood, which, I mean, that sounds like a totally made up thing. The standard course of treatment for this sort of thing was to just let people bleed out, which, I mean, that's also just kind of the way doctors treated practically everything else. They had no other explanation for. But this time, doctors decided to just let people dance it out since they didn't really want the streets running red with blood. Authorities quickly got to work building and opening 2 meeting halls and a wooden stage. They even hired musicians to continuously play music and, presumably to just give people some variety, I guess. At the height of the plague, as many as 15 people per day were dancing themselves to death. How insane is that? Modern science, 500 years later, still has absolutely no idea what caused it, even though like scientists figured out how to cure leprosy, which, like I mentioned earlier, literally causes your body to fall apart. At best, all right, scientists kind of assume that a fungus with the same chemical structure as LSD that grows on rye was the cause. They also attribute the same fungus to the hysteria that caused the Salem witch trials. So, that seems like a cop-out. It's just like any event where people just started acting weird. Oh, it's just, look, guys, there was some fungus on the wheat, and it got into the air, and basically people just started acting like they were on LSD, and that's what it was. No, that's just weird. And there's the fact that there's no real explanation for that is crazy. But whatever. I don't know. Eventually people stop dancing, I guess. The last story we'll talk about here is the Tanganyika laughter epidemic. On January 30th, 1962, someone ripped a fart, just a massive, juicy, wet fart, I'm guessing, and inside a mission-run all-girls boarding school in Kashasha, which is a small village near Lake Victoria in Tanzania, Africa. 3 girls began giggling because that's what you do when someone farts, especially like a good one, just a rip. Anyway, however, by the end of that day, 95 of the 159 girls at the school were laughing uncontrollably. Like no one could stop. It's the dancing plague all over again. The laughter continued for another 3 months, and the teachers, who did not find any of this funny at all, could not control their classrooms. And the school was actually forced to close down on March 18th. Like, teachers would just show up to school and their entire classroom is just laughing hysterically, uncontrollably. And you can't teach under that environment. The laughing girls were sent back to their respective villages where the chuckles continued to spread. By May, 217 people were suffering, ? From uncontrollable laughing fits. I don't know. I mean, like, if you can't stop laughing, is that the worst thing? Like, I mean, you're laughing. I mean, your abs probably start to hurt after a while, but it's not like the worst thing that could happen to you. The school in Kashasha tried to reopen on May 21st, but then closed again at the end of June because people still could not stop laughing. And it's constant. It was never ending. Later that month, another village reported 48 girls laughing uncontrollably. And by now, other symptoms had joined the laughter and included rashes, fainting, flatulence, of course, and random screaming, which all of those symptoms in that order just sounds exponentially funnier. Like, okay, sure, a rash from laughing too hard, that's a little concerning, actually. All right, fainting because you laugh so hard, all right, pretty funny. Laughing so hard that you're farting uncontrollably, pretty hilarious. And then laughing so hard that you then just scream without any warning. That's pretty great. The school in Kashasha was sued by parents in the village, but nothing ever happened with that. And then 18 months later, after the first girl started laughing, everything finally stopped. Everybody finally got serious. But in the aftermath, 14 schools were shut down and over 1,000 people were infected by the mysterious laughing disease. Scientists, as with the dancing plague, never really have been able to figure out what caused it. The leading theory is that the laughing fits were caused by stress, which, if you know anything about Africa, those people are under a lot of stress all the time. And that's not even a joke. Like, they're always at war with each other. You never know when you just walk out and all of a sudden here comes some warlord here ready to cut your head off and rape you to death. And if you're not worried about that, there's lions and poisonous snakes and other like wild animals out there ready to kill you. Like, those people, it's pretty tense over there, I'm guessing. I've never been, but I mean, that's the environment I've created in my head. And there's statistics and evidence to back that up. That region in Tanzania had recently won its independence, and those students were feeling an immense amount of pressure to perform well in school and establish high standards for their newly independent region. And instead of voicing their concerns, maybe trying to get some counseling, which I'm sure was readily available in Africa, the stress eventually just ate at them to a point where they laughed themselves into a maniacal fit. So, told you it was going to be weird today. So that's going to do it for today's stories. So there you go. 3 really strange epidemics that science mostly cannot explain. I mean, we figured out the syphilis one. That was pretty obvious. But yeah, man, the dancing and the laughing, crazy. So let's review real quick with what did we learn today.
What did we learn?
I think this is going to be pretty straightforward. Number 1, French people invaded Italy, got it on with some dirty Italian prostitutes, and they all got syphilis. And then they all literally had their bodies start falling apart and rotting away. And that's pretty gross. Number 2, people in France just started dancing uncontrollably in 1518. I mean, look, I don't know what kind of dances were happening in the 1500s, but I like to just imagine people just twerking and doing the Dougie and the electric slide and the cha-cha slide and the Macarena and all those other dances you do at weddings. You know, how fun would that be? Just a bunch of people in 1500s dress and they're just doing the stanky leg. I'm trying to think of like all of the dances that I've heard of. Doing the Superman that hoe. I'm sounding very white right now. But yeah, that was probably a crazy sight. And number 3, a lot of African children started laughing uncontrollably. And some people say they have not laughed since because Africa does not seem to be a very happy place. I'm kidding. I'm sure there are pockets of happiness there, but I totally get it. God, I mean, can you imagine laughing nonstop for 18 months? Like your abs would probably totally be shredded. Like you probably have a really solid 6-pack at that point. But I mean, could you ever laugh again after laughing for 18 months straight? That'd be crazy. Next week on Our Weird World, we are going to talk about elephants. All right. Now I know what you're thinking. Bro, elephants are just animals. They're not weird. All right. Like we're all aware of elephants. All right. Like I'll give you credit. I had not heard about the dancing thing. That was pretty sweet. But I've heard of elephants, bro. No, I get it. You've heard of elephants, but we're going to be talking about 2 very specific elephants, not elements, elephants. And if you have picked up on the pattern of the way this show goes, you will not be disappointed in how next week's episode goes. So if you're curious, come on back for that one. Thank you all for continuing to listen. As always, tell your friends and keep it weird.